Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's event. I'm Laura Dillon from MS Dynamics World, and we're here today for a session on how to optimize licensing of Dynamics and Power Platform apps. Our presenter today is Alexandra Kulu with Mazars, and it's my pleasure to welcome her here with us today. So as we get started, please know that we do welcome your questions. You can feel free to type those in at any time during her presentation in the chat interface that you'll see on the GoToWebinar panel. And someone from the Mazars team will be following up with you individually after the session. So Alexandra, without any further delay, I'm going to hand things off to you to get us started.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Laura. And as mentioned, my name is Alexandra Kulu. I'm a senior consultant at Mazars, working predominantly within our management and technology consulting group. I am a Microsoft certified professional, and my primary focus is on the Dynamics 365 platform. Before we begin, I'd like to take just a brief moment to give an overview of Mazars. Mazars is a full-service tax, audit, advisory, and consulting organization with national and international professionals. Mazars is a Microsoft Gold partner, helping clients implement end-to-end solutions across all three Microsoft clouds. This includes Azure, Digital Workplace, and business applications. Our engagement model is customer-centric. We provide a boutique feel, even though Mazars is represented in 93 countries with well over 40,000 employees worldwide. Achieving client goals is our primary objective. We hope to be a one-stop shop for all industry and Microsoft-specific business needs. Today, I'll introduce the current licensing model, and I'll share how organizations can optimize licensing of Microsoft business applications across both Dynamics and the Power Platform. In short, I hope this presentation will be informative and beneficial for those who are considering Microsoft products and/or those who are already existing Microsoft customers. We have a lot of fun content to cover today, so bear with me, sit back, relax, and apologies for the few water breaks. And now let's briefly go over what our agenda should be. So the licensing model is an ever-changing landscape, and often common questions arise all around kind of how to license Microsoft products and what licensing is. I will begin by highlighting the acquisition of licenses and the varying license types. This will set the tone for our more focused conversation surrounding Dynamics and the Power Platform. Rounding out the conversation today, we'll cover license compliance, multiplexing, tips and tricks, and recommended resources. Now, let's get into the good stuff. The current licensing model allows for licenses to be acquired through one of two sources. Please keep in mind that considerations will need to be made based on volume and geography when acquiring licenses. But the first source is a Microsoft Cloud Service Provider, commonly known as CSP. Cloud service providers are partners dedicated to supporting the success and end-to-end lifecycle of Microsoft customers. Partners not only foster business growth, but are skilled to directly provision, manage, and support customer subscriptions. They house a wealth of information and resources. Now, the second source for Microsoft license acquisition is directly through Microsoft themselves. And indifferent of these sources, Microsoft licensing programs can be leveraged by any Microsoft licenses you would need to purchase. Our discussion today has a primary focus on both cloud licenses for Dynamics and the Power Platform. However, these programs encompass any Microsoft license you would wish to purchase, such as Office 365, Microsoft 365, Windows 365, Azure, on-premise software, and pretty much any combination you can think of, or your business needs. To illustrate, if your organization only has a small number of Dynamics users, but every individual you employ has an Office 365 license, it could be helpful and recommended to reach out to Microsoft and see what you may qualify for, what can be done for you, and how they can help. With that in mind, let's discuss Microsoft licensing programs. Microsoft Enterprise Agreements are categorized by two enrollment options: Enrollment Enterprise, or Enterprise Enrollment, love it, and Server and Cloud Enrollment. The overall Enterprise Agreement targets organizations willing to make a 3-year minimum investment in software or cloud subscriptions totaling over 500 per user, per device, or hybrid licenses. These programs offer enterprise clients a range of savings. Generally, you'll get anywhere between 15 to 45% discounts, as well as set rates for the lifetime of that investment period. With each 3-year investment period, Microsoft offers flexible payments. So let's say your organization is not too fond of upfront costs. You would be willing and possibly able to consider an annual payment plan. This would disperse all your payments in equal proportions. And I know a 3-year investment may seem daunting and difficult to grasp with the rapidly changing environment and organizations who are quickly growing. This is why Microsoft Enterprise Agreements offer a number of benefits. Some of the benefits include true-up, subscription options, and software assurance to support unique business needs. Let's dive a little bit into the benefits as they may apply to your organization. First, we have the true-up process, which occurs annually based on the agreement date signed, and it provides organizations with an opportunity to see what users they need to add or adjust for user-specific licenses, devices, and/or services, and this will all be done at that rate for that investment period. Think of it from the perspective of no additional contracts or orders required for your growing business. Next, we have subscription enrollment. These options are for organizations who are in an ever-changing model. This path provides the most flexibility, allowing subscribers to both upsize and downsize on an annual basis. However, the business must agree and accept the rights of use for products and services are based on a subscription rather than an ownership model. I'm going to make one big key call out is that you can continue to have the rights to use for the lifetime of that agreement or the subsequent agreements, and there is a possibility to buy out for permanent use if choosing to do so and not renewing. And lastly, the last benefit I want to discuss today is that Microsoft offers software assurance. This is, the ability to access new tech releases, instructor-led training, 24/7 support or escalation, and so much more. In a nutshell, we've kind of covered who qualifies and how to benefit from an enterprise agreement. Now, I want to circle back to the server and cloud enrollment program. Most of the details ranging from benefits and cost structures are identical, so no need to worry there. The main difference is the target demographic. Here, we want to focus on organizations willing to make, again, a 3-year minimum investment in software or cloud subscriptions by buying one or more servers in addition to the Microsoft Cloud technologies. As always, this is not intended to be an all-inclusive list of Microsoft licensing programs. There are a number of other programs that benefit commercial, government, and academic organizations. So please feel free to reach out and see what you may qualify. And this is both for cloud services and on-premise services. Now, there are a couple different licensing types that can be seen floating around the ecosystem. I would like to take a few minutes and highlight the most common ones. At the top of my screen, you'll see user licensing. That is the most common and often thought of first. User licensing means each individual person accessing that software is licensed for that specific software, regardless of the device used. A great example of this is if you had an AP clerk. That AP clerk would need access to Dynamics, and subsequently, that team member would have a license assigned specifically to them. It's pretty straightforward. Now, on the far side, we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and you'll see there is device licensing. This concept is very similar to user licensing. However, device licensing means each physical device that you can hold in your hands will be licensed for specific software. Team members will be granted access through either a shared account or assigned logins for that device. The most common and frequently seen example for device licensing is the retail POS system. Companies will license each individual terminal rather than every possible employee that may happen to be using the terminals. This method could lead to some efficiencies and cost savings in the long run. And keeping this train rolling, you'll see that we also have organizational and tenant licensing. This license type applies to the entire organization or tenant. The most common and probably the easiest to grasp example is Dynamics 365 marketing, as it applies to the entire organization and individual users may not necessarily need to be licensed. Another easy to grasp example is add-on storage. Additional storage does not go to a specific user or a specific person. Rather, it's applied to the organization as a whole and can be consumed in any manner across a single tenant. And let's get to the last one. So on the bottom of my screen, you'll see pay-as-you-go or usage licensing. The easiest way to kind of depict pay-as-you-go is organizations will only pay if and when they use an application. This type of license may apply to Azure, Powerapps, Dataverse storage capacity. Basically, the consumption of Microsoft tools or products in specific scenarios. The license type for pay-as-you-go is intended to reduce the initial overhead and works best in some scenarios where you have, unpredictable usage, infrequent usage, and on the other hand, very rigid and very defined usage patterns. So this method is down to the minute. So if a team member you have is developing in an environment and spends 2 days, a week and about 2 hours each day, you'll be paying for those 2 hours of development time where that environment was running each day. Now, to reiterate, these license types are across all Microsoft products and platforms. Now, I'd like to take a moment and kind of transition our conversation towards licensing of Dynamics and the Power Platform business applications specifically, because that's what we're all here for. So Dynamics licenses fit kind of one of two broad categories. And within those categories, you'll see some of the concepts and license types we've covered now. The first category includes user licenses, and device licenses, and this can be known as assigned licenses because they are assigned to someone or something. The second category is unassigned licenses, and this would include any features or services that reside at the tenant level. So those are our two, big blocks, and within them, again, we have our license types. Now, I hope we're excited, so let's drill into Dynamics licensing specifically. And while we're shifting our conversation, I'd like to call out the legend at the bottom of the screen. This will depict each license type that's applicable to the business applications housed within Dynamics 365. It's pretty simple, but the person icon refers to user licenses, the laptop icon refers to device licenses, and the building icon refers to tenant licenses. The easiest description of the current licensing model is a base license with add-on licenses. Licenses for products that provide the core business functionality qualify as a base license. Each individual team member accessing a Dynamics 365 product will be required to have a minimum of one base license. If users in your organization sit in roles that require access to more than one, they would then qualify for add-on licenses. These are more properly known as attached licenses. To reiterate, the tiles on the screen highlight the available full user licenses containing all the feature-rich functionality Dynamics has to offer. Each user accessing the business application or applications will be required to have an individual base license and then however many attached licenses for their named user or record in the system. Please understand the base licenses and attached licenses are 100% identical. The only difference is the cost and kind of how you would assign them to an end user. And let's see, at the top of my screen, we are depicting all of the primary base licenses residing within the ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning applications, and CRM, Customer Relationship Management applications, with marketing way on the far right because that's tenant-based. So just keep that in mind. The base licenses for Sales Enterprise and Customer Service Enterprise can either be licensed per user or per device. This is intended to give organizations some flexibility dependent on their needs. If an end user needs access to field service only, that team member would have a single base license for field service. It's pretty straightforward. Now, at the bottom of my screen, you'll see the available attached licenses for the ERP and CRM business applications. One item I would really like to highlight is that attached licenses can only be purchased as a per user license. And again, it's pretty straightforward. It's depicted by the little person icon. And following the selection of a base license, these could be, acquired at any point in time, and they could be attached for any number of users for any number of job functions that need to be accomplished. And like anything else in the world, Microsoft prices are subject to change, but pricing will have an impact on how you license your organization and how you should be comparing base licenses and attached licenses. The best rule of thumb I can give you is all licenses that you are purchasing to be compliant with Microsoft and follow the procedures set in place should be known under one good rule of thumb. Base licenses must always be the most expensive license you are using. If the prices are identical, functionality, price, all identical, it will not make a difference which is selected, so business operations should be taken into consideration. Let's go into a couple examples to kind of drill through this model a little better. The first example is, let's take an organization that is requiring a base license or business applications of finance and supply chain management. The per user costs are identical. So again, that organization could select either base license technically. But if the organization works predominantly on the supply chain management side, there is a chance they could consider all base licenses for supply chain management with a finance attached license. The one caveat is, this is, something to be aware of, is generally we would recommend a split or spread among all base licenses for any areas of operation that you do or use. And this is because eventually you may have one user that needs access to an independent application rather than multiple applications. This will provide, businesses with some flexibility. Things are changing. You may have department sizes fluctuate, employee turnover. You could acquire a new department. You may restructure. Pretty much any organizational change that could or would happen. This gives you a little bit of flexibility in reassigning licenses you've already acquired. On the other hand, if you were to purchase all supply chain management base licenses with a finance add-on, and then you have a team member who is finance only, you are essentially giving them a base license that they will not utilize just to benefit from the attached license. So to avoid any excess or any areas of improvement or lack of utilization, we have an easy motto to remember, and our motto is cover all your bases. Now, I want to give another example. So we had just discussed, where business operations come into play and if pricing is the exact same. On the flip side, let's take organization XYZ. They require access to both finance and sales enterprise. In this scenario, the organization would be required to select a specific base license, and that base license is finance. The attached license would then be sales enterprise. And this is pretty easily known due to the cost difference of 180 and 95. On top of all of the base and attached licenses, there are some requirements. So if you would like to acquire the marketing attached license, which again is a tenant license, an organization will be required to have over 10 fully licensed users within Dynamics 365. Then you would be qualified for the attached price. Like this, there are some minimums to be aware of. Marketing is an easy example. However, Microsoft does have a baseline requirement, also known as, let's say, a purchase requirement. So there is a 20-seat minimum requirement or SKU requirement to deploy a Dynamics 365 ERP business application. Hopefully some of these examples we've covered today will provide a sound picture of, how the licensing model is currently operating. Please understand this is not an all-inclusive list of every available license, and I have not gone through every possible license combination. That would be quite difficult, and we could be here for a long time. Therefore, we have focused our time up until now on the full user licenses. Again, that is all the feature-rich functionality that comes with the business applications. Before moving on, I would like to briefly discuss some of the more limited licenses available. These are known as additional user licenses. These licenses have very restrictive rights, and they can only do very limited tasks within Dynamics 365. If a full user license is not required for all employees, generally, not everyone needs to do everything. So there is a time where you could select one of these additional user licenses and provide access to the applications at a lower cost. Some of these additional user licenses, here are a few examples. We'll say operations activity license. There's a HR self-service license, and the most common additional user license is the team member license. Again, these have restrictive rights and restrictive access for certain scenarios, but they do come with a slightly lower cost. And now let's round out our discussion. So as we mentioned, there are two categories for Dynamics licenses. We've covered the assigned licenses. Now let's talk about some of the unassigned licenses. And these unassigned licenses are predominantly known as add-on licenses. Microsoft describes unassigned licenses as providing tenant-level access to Dynamics 365 applications and resources. They are not assigned to a specific user or device. The most common examples pretty much include, let's say, additional database storage or file capacity, additional contacts for marketing, and additional sandboxes for testing so for like sandbox testing and testing at the tenant level, any deployment, involvement, project work. This can all be known as an add-on license. And again, as a final reminder, this slide is not an all-inclusive list. Rather, it's intended to give you the understanding and knowledge of how the licensing model is set up for Dynamics specifically and how to make some informed decisions and start evaluating the licensing process. And let's take our time to kind of slide over to our Power Platform. And this discussion, again, is going to be a more targeted approach to Power Platform licensing specifically. At the top of my screen, you'll see we have Powerapps Licensing. Powerapps can be licensed in one of two ways, per app or per user. Please note some restrictions and capacity limits apply to each of the licensing options on the screen. Per app licensing is a great entry point for organizations who have not yet, adopted the larger Powerapps platform. They want an opportunity to test out some of the features, functionalities, and how it may apply to their business. This option offers a lower entry point for the full capabilities of the Power App. And essentially, the best way to remind yourself of how it works is it allows an individual user to run one custom application or portal. The purchasing methods vary for the per app licenses and can be broken down into either a subscription, if you're willing to make a slightly longer term test run, or a pay-as-you-go model with monthly installments. One of the great reasons to select the per app method is if you only need one or two, applications. Any other or any more applications, then we would suggest considering the per user model. The second licensing option, like we just discussed, is per user. This plan allows licensed users to run unlimited custom applications based on the full capabilities of the Power Platform. It's geared for organizations who are, willing to make that investment in their digital transformation, who are willing to take advantages of, the agility and ease to build applications and solve business needs. And on the bottom of the trio, you'll see we have the option for use rights from other licenses. This means licenses such as Dynamics 365, Microsoft 365, or Office 365. Use rights are generally described as limited access rights to other applications in the same environment as the primary licensed application for some extended capabilities and functionality. Let's think of this. So if you are using a primary license in Dynamics 365, you would have some limited use rights to Power Apps within that same environment. I would like to call out that the specifics of the use rights vary based on the primary application and should be reviewed in detail. Now, let's move on to the bottom left of my screen where you'll see Power Virtual Agents. Power Virtual Agents takes a much different approach compared to Power Apps. It is a per tenant license. And think of it like an initial license with a base license and some add-ons again. So the base license is a tenant license which includes 2,000 sessions. and you can purchase add-ons by the thousands. This model is, quite easy and most commonly used in, let's say, customer service scenarios. So if your organization wants to use it for a chatbot feature, there you go. But please understand, the versatility is far beyond customer service. I would like to highlight that Microsoft describes build sessions as an interaction between a user and the bot representing the consumption of one unit. And a single session between a user and a bot can extend and consume a second session count if the time or chat limit is exceeded. So the best way to think of it is if a chat between a user and the bot exceeds an hour, you will automatically roll into a second unit. However, vice versa is if a conversation between a user and a bot exceeds over 100 turns exchanged, on the 101st exchange, it'll turn into a second unit build. So some things to be aware of. And, again, similar to up top, we have a third option for licensing Power Virtual Agents, and that is through the use rights of other licenses, such as Dynamics 365 and Office 365. And we're going to keep this show on the road. So let's see, we have Power BI licensing in the center of my screen. And Power BI can be licensed in one of two primary methods. The first is a per capacity method, and the second is a per user method. I would like to call out that per capacity is really similar to per tenant. Per capacity licenses are dedicated to a specific machine where the organization or organizations would run all of their Power BI analytics from. The environment technically owns that license, but the users in the tenant would be able to run reports and dashboards and other analytics without having to be individually licensed. It's important to be aware that the environment does have some limit on storage and compute capabilities, but these are really high and most commonly, come into play in big data scenarios. Granted, it's not impossible, but if your organization were to max out the capacity, you could purchase additional machines or servers, and they could be dedicated to helping support the analytics and processing. Now, I want to shift gears and talk about the second licensing option. This is per user, similar to most of the other per users. However, per user licenses can be broken down into a hierarchy. We have two levels. We have Pro, which is the base level, and we have Premium, which is a more advanced level, providing some additional capabilities. The most common I've come across are paginated reports are added, you have some extra storage and compute, faster refresh rates, and even some advanced AI. And like all the other Power Platform products, we have a third option for licensing Power BI through use rights of other licenses. And last but surely not least, we have Power Automate. And this you can see is on the bottom right of my screen. The base licensing is per user or per flow. Like all the other per user licensing, it enables a single individual with access to create unlimited flows. While the per flow, on the other hand, is licensed per the number of flows for that organization. And then you have individuals accessing those flows obtained. The base license will come with 5 flows, and this is pretty much regardless of if you choose to use all 5. I'm sure there are plenty of business scenarios we'd be happy to help determine where you could officiate, automate and kind of find some efficiency. But if you do choose to use all 5 and you would like to purchase more, they can be purchased at a standard rate by any number of flows. And on top of both of these methods, there is some other capability within the Power Platform. Again, we are not covering every detail possible, but one great feature is RPA. This is also known as robotic process automation. And this is an add-on that can be included with the Power Automate, either attended, unattended, but again, all of these add-ons are a per user license. That is the basis for all add-ons. And last option for licensing, again, is with the capabilities of use rights. And this will include use rights for, let's say, Powerapps, Dynamics 365, and Office 365. So we have covered the primary licenses and the licensing options within. I want to start rounding out this discussion on the Power Platform and highlight that every Power Platform license has some default subscription capacity and details, surrounding how it can be utilized. And they are all leveraged to accrue across a single tenant. If capacity add-ons are required for your organization, they can be purchased at any time. do not worry. But that purchase for the add-on will remain part of the subscription for the remainder of the term. And again, just a super friendly reminder, this slide is not an all-inclusive list, but it gives you enough information to start the licensing process and give you a foundation of the current pricing. Now that we've covered both Dynamics licensing and the Power Platform licensing, I would like to go into some details of what you need to know to stay compliant. And compliance can be considered the rules and regulations of licensing. I know, it's super exciting. So compliance is generally the hardest to manage within Dynamics 365, finance, and supply chain management. The reasoning behind this is that the applications do not have built-in guardrails. And guardrails are referring to licensing. So these organizations could potentially give users unlicensed access to the environment without being stopped or having like a warning pop up. Microsoft licensing audits frequently occur, and this would result in the identification of any improperly or unlicensed individuals, potentially resulting in a very large bill and some penalties. So to avoid any future penalties and any accrued cost, it is critical to run reports at a regular interval, as well as have a dedicated team or individual evaluating your finance and supply chain management licenses for your organization. If a schedule is hard to keep up, I would personally recommend doing this in conjunction with any application updates or any maintenance, as those already need to occur. So while discussing licensing, there is one thing to note that Dynamics 365 applications have a role-based security model. This means that users are assigned to security roles based on their responsibility and participation in business procedures. The security model is hierarchical and quite intricate in nature. So if you're unfamiliar, I would just advise to take a few minutes and kind of look up and take a moment to familiarize yourself with some of the roles, sub-roles, duties, privileges, and details of the security architecture. Now, back to the reports. So reports can be run in Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management. And those reports essentially compare every user in your system with their assigned security roles. Now, the security roles assigned will define each license required based on what that user has access to. And again, you'll have a report that provides you all the results of the licenses needed for that environment. And let's take a quick example. If I have 10 users in a Dynamics 365 business application, such as finance, and they have, let's say, a staff accountant security role assigned, and I run a licensing report, it would result in 10 finance licenses. Now, if I were to take another example, and I have an organization with 10 users, but they are assigned both staff accountant and procurement manager security roles, the report would result in 10 finance and 10 supply chain management licenses. Again, an organization would need to then compare the results of the report with their current licenses to ensure they are not under licensed in any way, shape, or form. So organizations at the end of the day are required to guarantee they have enough licenses. So this is, a lot about the finance and supply chain side. I want to talk about the CRM side as well. So Microsoft Dynamics CRM business applications and Dataverse have a slightly more intuitive licensing setup. There are some guardrails in place, which is a nice to know thing, but you will need to make sure you still have enough licenses. On the other hand, on top of making sure you have enough licenses, you should have a focus on evaluating what licenses are required for the deployment of the applications. Because if you have an existing application and you decide, I want to take advantage of another business application, and you deploy them in the same environment, there could potentially be some restricted tables. This is a big call out when you're designing, developing, solutioning, or considering a business application. If you were to run into any issues with the restricted tables, there is an easy option of deploying them in separate environments. But again, this comes down to your architecture and the understanding of how your licensing works. All of this information on restricted tables can be found online in Microsoft documentation. Now, when purchasing licenses through Microsoft, the Volume License Service Center and Microsoft Business Centers are basically two customer service portals that are wonderful for helping you see what licenses your organization currently maintains and finding some of the latest documentation surrounding licensing. You know, it's a one-stop shop for information. Now, I want to really highly recommend that organizations themselves stay up to date on licensing, especially if your organization is coming up on a renewal period or having to evaluate as your renewal is upcoming. The reason for this is if you are renewing anytime soon and licensing changes have occurred to either the model or licenses themselves, you will need to adopt those licensing changes. So having a single team member, you know, review licensing guides, stay up to date, or at least have some familiarity will assist in the renewal and update so you're not overwhelmed or anything of that nature. Again, this is all publicly available information. Licensing guides are available and partners and Microsoft professionals are happy to help, but it does aid in the process of being compliant. Lastly, do not multiplex, as it will make your organization non-compliant. This is a very big deal. So I would like to take a moment and dive into what multiplexing is for those who are unfamiliar. Microsoft describes multiplexing as the use of hardware or software to pool connections, reroute or indirectly access information, and/or reduce the number of devices or users that directly access or use a product. The intention is not to solely restrict design capabilities. Rather, you know, we do encourage streamlining procedures and potentially pooling information or directing access and, you know, having some architecture decisions made. However, Microsoft must ensure that all clients stay compliant with all the licensing rules and regulations. The easiest way to think of multiplexing is when you are reviewing design and architecture options. You're in the middle of a solution conversation, and let's say option A requires more options, and then option B is the same concept for who's using the system and the information and the application being deployed. However, you are reducing licenses through a single entry point. That is known as multiplexing, and that is not allowed. To reiterate, any design decisions made to result in purchasing fewer licenses than otherwise required is considered multiplexing and would result in your organization being non-compliant. Please note, and I mean this, multiplexing is complex, so we're here to help, but multiplexing is an important topic to be aware of as it applies to all Microsoft products. Our conversation today is focused on Dynamics and the Power Platform, so that's the direction we'll head now. As mentioned, multiplexing does not reduce the number of Microsoft licenses required. Licenses are required to input, query, or view data from Dynamics 365, finance, supply chain, CRM, any of business applications, regardless of whether it's directly accessed or you're accessing from a pooled device. Powerapps cannot be used to reduce licensing counts. Users or devices accessing any services, files, data, or content from Dynamics 365 must be licensed even if it is an automated process. There is one exception, you know, to be aware of. Licensed users may manually rekey information into Dynamics 365. The reason they're allowed to do this is because they are fully licensed and there's no automation involved. Lastly, multiplexing applies to Dataverse restricted tables. Again, it is included in an important topic of conversation for any and all Microsoft products. Now, let's dig into the fun stuff. We have some wonderful tips and tricks for you today. And the first tip of the day is included rights. We highly encourage, and I personally recommend, reviewing your current licenses for any and all Microsoft products or platforms you're utilizing. The reason for this is you could take advantage of the use rights included. Companies can drive major efficiencies and uncover a number of opportunities for digital transformation, for improvement, for efficiency, especially when they realize they're already paying for these services. It's incredible, and I mean incredible, how many customers have Powerapps licenses or any other licenses laying around that they haven't been using. They can solve real business problems and drive astronomical value when they're already paid for. So dependent on your organization structure, dependent on your organization security, take a look at your use rights and possibly let your users know you have access. They may have wonderful ideas on how to improve day-to-day, monthly, yearly, annual procedures and get an ROI out of it. And again, we're here, there's a chat function. Feel free to put any questions in. We want to help. This is our number one reason and number one tip and trick of the day, because it's important. And if you have any licenses laying around and specific questions arise, there is some wonderful information online. Again, feel free to maximize what you are already paying for. Now, our tip number 2 is evaluation. Evaluate your current and future licensing needs. So this is a really important topic, and I think this comes to play for any companies who are considering design or potentially considering new business applications or expanding their Microsoft scope. The reason for this is Microsoft is wonderful in providing a number of avenues to design a solution and receiving the same result. However, there could potentially be a significant difference, and especially on the Power Platform side, on the licensing costs associated with how you design and what tools you are using. So be aware of this as you're starting conversations, be aware of this as you're designing your solution, be aware of this throughout the entire process, because there could be a serious price difference depending how you build and architect your system. Even at specific intervals, if you're not considering any new technology, it's always great to stay up and kind of evaluate your current licensing needs and evaluate where you want to be in the future. Businesses always need to look ahead. Now, tip number 3, volume licensing. If your business has grown tremendously in the last couple of years, you may now qualify for an enterprise agreement, again, also known as EA, or any other programs Microsoft offers. Now, this ties in with our tip number 4. If you have a parent company. So on that same note, you may qualify for a licensing agreement through the combination of a parent company or a subsidiary if the primary ownership is the same individual or team of individuals. We're talking 51% or more, all are owned by one person or one group. This presents, a possibility of combining the two for a single agreement. And I know it's sometimes a interesting thought, so let me give a few examples. If you are a smaller subsidiary with a parent company who has an enterprise agreement, you could potentially hop onto that existing agreement and save money. Now, another option, and this has, if there's any legal separation between domestic or international branches of your company, I'll take the easiest one. Let's say US and Canada. You have a US branch, you have a Canadian branch. They both have the same majority ownership. You could join forces. And if you join forces and have the volume, you could potentially qualify for an agreement and potentially have some cost savings. So it's great to review your organization, how you're structured, and what the requirements are for promotions, agreements, and so forth. Now, that brings us to tip number 5, promotions. Ask about promotions, specifically when you're renewing licenses, when you want to deploy a new solution. Anytime your organization is willing to have that conversation, I highly recommend it, because you may never know what is available. On the Power Platform side, there has been so much good innovation, and it is constantly providing new tools, new features, and with that comes some really good discounts, especially over this last year. So please reach out to a partner, reach out to a Microsoft representative, and ask if there are any promotions going on. And if not, ask them to keep you up to date if something does come up. So with that being said, how to get information. I want to round out our discussion today with some really good resources. First, all the topics covered, specifically discussing Dynamics licensing and Power Platform licensing, can be found in a licensing guide. All of this information is available to the public. I would recommend going to Microsoft documentation, and then you can see what resources there are, and you can download, any of the PDF files you find applicable to your organization. And on top of that, if you're not going directly to Microsoft, or if you can't find what you're looking on Microsoft documentation online, there are wonderful forums such as Microsoft Dynamics World and any other online forum. These are really close-knit communities, so feel free to put a question on the blog, put any questions out there that you may come across. You can also review other questions that have already been posted. A lot of times they are very active with responses, and licensing is a hard topic, so people may be asking the same questions. It's right at your disposal. You just need to get online. And finally, please feel free to reach out to your Microsoft account representative or an executive or whoever is representing you at Microsoft, as well as your partner. We have access to information. We're happy to share our knowledge, and we want you to succeed. With that, I hope this presentation has served you well and given you a well-rounded overview of kind of the licensing landscape, some of the potential tools to aid your organization, and given you, the confidence to tackle licensing. So I hope this has been wonderfully informative, but if you have any questions that come up after the presentation, you can reach us at bizapps@mazarsusa.com. Again, we deal with licensing, we deal with Microsoft on a daily basis. We are happy to help answer questions and give you the support you may need. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure speaking with all of you.
Thank you, Alexandra. That was just such an informative presentation, a lot of information to digest there, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us today. We did record today's event, and we'll be making that available. And if you did type a question in during her presentation, you can look forward to a response from someone from the Mazars team in the very near future. So with that, we're going to end it there. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.